The phone rang at 5:02 a.m., and I knew before I answered that nothing good ever comes with a call at that hour. I was awake already. I always am before dawn. Old habits from a lifetime of responsibility don't fade just because the house is quiet now. The ocean outside my windows was still black, the air heavy with salt and cold when my phone lit up on the nightstand. Miguel Torres, head of private security. That alone told me everything was about to change. "Mrs. Marrow," he said carefully when I answered, his voice clipped but controlled, "I'm sorry to wake you. We have a situation at the front gate." I sat up slowly, pulling my robe around my shoulders. "What kind of situation?" There was a pause, just long enough to matter. "Your daughter-in-law is here," he said. "With a moving truck, 2 movers. She's claiming she has legal authority to enter the property." I didn't ask him to repeat himself. I didn't gasp, I didn't panic, I didn't even feel surprised, because deep down I had been waiting for this moment. "She says the house belongs to her now," Miguel added. "She's demanding we open the gate?" I closed my eyes for a second, not out of fear but recognition. Cassandra always did like dramatic entrances. She believed confidence could replace legitimacy. That if she spoke loudly enough, the world would rearrange itself to suit her. "Is my son with her?" I asked. "No, ma'am, just her." Of course, Cassandra Marrow never liked witnesses unless she controlled the narrative. I stood, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain aside. Far below, past the palms and the stone path, headlights cut through the dark. A white moving truck idled at my gate like it belonged there. "So," Miguel said cautiously, "how would you like us to proceed?" I smiled, not because it was funny, because it was finished. "Open the gate," I said. There was silence on the line. "Ma'am," he asked, clearly thinking he'd misheard me. "Let her in," I repeated calmly, "and make sure every camera is recording." "Yes, Mrs. Marrow," he said, professionalism snapping back into place. "Understood." I ended the call and stood there for a long moment, listening to the distant hum of the truck as the gate slid open. Most people think strength looks like confrontation. Raised voices, threats, ultimatums. They're wrong. Real power is knowing exactly when someone has walked into the trap you prepared quietly, patiently, without ever announcing it. I poured myself a cup of tea and watched from the balcony as Cassandra stepped out of her car like a woman arriving to claim a prize. She wore a cream-colored coat, oversized sunglasses despite the darkness, her posture sharp and assured. She pointed toward the house, already giving orders to the movers as if she'd done this 100 times before. She didn't look up. She didn't check. She didn't hesitate. That was her mistake. Months earlier, I had noticed the change. The casual questions about deeds, the sudden concern about my memory. The way my son Ethan had grown quieter, more distant, repeating phrases that didn't sound like his own. "You should simplify, Mom. Cassandra just worries about you. It's probably better if we handle things." That was when I stopped explaining, stopped arguing, and started preparing. I sipped my tea as Cassandra entered my home, her heels clicking confidently against floors she believed were already hers. She had no idea that every step she took, every order she gave, every lie she told before sunrise was being recorded, documented, and preserved. And she had no idea that by the time my son arrived, the story she planned to tell him would already be impossible to believe. I set the cup down, straightened my robe, and walked toward the stairs. Because some lessons can only be taught when the other person believes they've already won. And Cassandra Marrow was about to learn hers. She thought she had come to collect a house. What she didn't realize was that she had arrived to give me everything I needed to take my life back. By the time Cassandra stepped fully into the living room, she already believed the house belonged to her. I could see it in the way she moved, how her eyes skimmed the walls, not with appreciation but inventory. How her fingers brushed the back of my chair as if testing whether it would be worth keeping. How she spoke to the movers without looking at them, the way people speak when they assume authority has already been granted. "Take the artwork last," she said. "I want to make sure it's wrapped properly. Some of it is irreplaceable." Irreplaceable. I had purchased every single piece with my own money after my husband died, when I learned the hard way that grief doesn't pay bills but preparation does. Miguel Torres stood near the doorway, posture straight, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't interrupt. He never did unless protocol required it. That was why I hired him. "Mrs. Marrow," he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear, "do you want me to pause the move?" I met his eyes and shook my head once. No, I said, let it continue. Cassandra turned sharply. See. She understands? What she didn't understand was that I wasn't allowing anything. I was documenting it. Ruth Calder's curtains across the courtyard twitched. She had been awake since dawn, she always was, and I knew she had already noticed the truck, the uniforms, the unusual activity. Ruth missed nothing. That was why she was still my closest friend after 30 years. She knew when to speak and when to wait. Cassandra opened her folder and approached me, her smile now edged with impatience. I don't want this to feel hostile, she said, as if hostility were something I'd introduced. But the paperwork is clear. Ethan and I discussed this. He agrees this is best. There it was, Ethan's name deployed like a shield. Did he? I asked. Her eyes flickered, just once, too quick for anyone else to notice. He doesn't like conflict, she said. You know that this arrangement spares him stress. I looked past her toward the hallway where family photos still hung, Ethan at 7 with a missing tooth, Ethan at 16 pretending not to smile, Ethan at 32 standing stiffly beside Cassandra on their wedding day. My son had always chosen quiet over clarity. It made him easy to live with. It also made him easy to use. Where is Ethan? I asked. He didn't want to wake you, Cassandra said smoothly. He's at work. At work. At 8 in the morning, on a day he'd taken off according to the calendar entry he forgot to erase. I nodded as if accepting her answer. May I see the documents? I asked. She hesitated just long enough to confirm my suspicion, then handed them over. The papers were impressive at first glance. Heavy stock, legal formatting, signatures in the right places. It would have convinced most people, especially someone they'd already decided was old and tired and overwhelmed. But I wasn't any of those things. I read every line slowly. Cassandra shifted her weight. One of the movers glanced at his watch. Miguel remained still. The language here is interesting, I said at last. Cassandra's smile stiffened. It's standard. It transfers possession, I continued calmly, but not ownership. She let out a short laugh. Helen, you're overthinking this. No, I said. I'm reading. Silence settled, thick, uncomfortable. These documents reference an amendment, I went on, tapping the page, dated 3 weeks ago. Yes, I'd like to see that amendment. Cassandra folded her arms. It's not necessary. That's unfortunate, I said, because without it this is incomplete. Miguel cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said to Cassandra, if ownership is in dispute, protocol requires we suspend activity. The moment Miguel said the word suspend, I felt the balance of the room shift. Cassandra didn't move at first. She just stared at him as if authority were something she could glare into submission. You can't seriously be considering that, she said. This is a family matter. Miguel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Ma'am, my responsibility is to the property owner and to documented authorization. Until clarity is established, the move pauses. He turned slightly toward me. Mrs. Marrow, I looked at the movers, 3 men who had arrived expecting an easy job and now found themselves standing in the middle of something far heavier than furniture. Please take a break, I said. Coffee is on the counter. Help yourselves? Relief flashed across their faces. They set their tools down quietly and stepped back, grateful for any excuse to remove themselves from tension that wasn't theirs. Cassandra's composure cracked. This is ridiculous, she snapped, rounding on me. You're embarrassing Ethan. That was her mistake. Ethan isn't here, I said calmly. So this isn't about him, it's about you. Her lips pressed together. For the first time since she'd walked in, she seemed unsure which version of herself to present. I'm trying to protect our future, she said, softening her tone. You've always said you wanted what was best for us. I said I wanted what was fair, I replied. Those are not the same thing. Ruth Calder appeared in the doorway then, as if summoned by instinct. She didn't ask permission, she never had, she simply stepped inside, eyes sharp, presence grounding. Helen, she said gently, I saw the truck. Everything all right? Perfect timing, Cassandra said before I could answer. Maybe you can talk some sense into her. Ruth didn't look at Cassandra, she looked at me. What's happening? She asked. They're attempting to remove property under disputed authority, Miguel said professionally. Ruth's eyebrows lifted. Without Helen's consent? With paperwork, Cassandra cut in. Legal paperwork? Ruth turned then, finally, and fixed Cassandra with a look that had quieted school boards and hospital administrators alike back in her day. Paper doesn't mean truth, she said. It just means someone wanted something badly enough to print it. Cassandra scoffed. You're just a neighbor. Yes, Ruth said, which means I have no stake in your outcome, only in the facts. Cassandra's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then turned away, lowering her voice. Ethan's calling. Answer it, I said. She hesitated. Put it on speaker, I added. Her jaw tightened. Slowly she did. Ethan, she said brightly. Hi, love. What's going on? His voice came through, already defensive. Miguel called me. Why are movers stopped? I closed my eyes for a moment. This was the sound of a man who wanted everything to be smooth without understanding what smoothness cost. Ethan, I said, did you authorize Cassandra to take possession of my house? Silence. Mom, he said finally, it's not like that. That wasn't the question, I replied. Another pause, longer this time. She explained it, he said. The documents, it's temporary. Temporary possession, I said, is still possession. Cassandra jumped in. Ethan, tell her, this is what we talked about. He sighed. I didn't think it would happen like this. I opened my eyes. That, I said quietly, is not an answer, that is avoidance. Ruth crossed her arms. Miguel shifted slightly, attentive but neutral. Ethan, I continued, did you review the documents with an attorney? No, he admitted. Cassandra said they were standard. Did you ask Jonah Pierce? There it was, the name Cassandra had hoped wouldn't surface. Ethan hesitated. No, Cassandra's head snapped toward me. Why would you bring him into this? Because he's my attorney, I said, and because I spoke to him 3 weeks ago. Her face drained of color. I reached into the drawer beside the console table and removed a thin folder. I hadn't planned to reveal it yet, but Cassandra had forced my hand. These, I said, are copies of the only valid documents tied to this property. Miguel stepped closer. Ruth leaned in. Cassandra took a step back. Jonah Pierce reviewed everything, I continued. He confirmed that any transfer of ownership would require my direct authorization, notarized independently with witnesses not affiliated with family beneficiaries. That's not what we were told, Cassandra said, too quickly. Who told you? Ruth asked. Cassandra didn't answer. Ethan's voice came through the phone again, smaller now. Mom, are you saying this isn't legal? I'm saying, I replied, that you were encouraged not to ask questions. Silence stretched. Miguel spoke into his radio. This is tours, maintain pause, no items leave the property. Cassandra's mask slipped fully then. You planned this, she said to me, eyes sharp with accusation. You let us come here? Yes, I said evenly, I did. You humiliated us. No, I corrected, you overreached. Ethan swallowed audibly. Cass, did you bring movers without confirming? She turned away from the phone. We needed leverage? That single word landed harder than any shout. Ruth inhaled sharply. Miguel's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. Leverage, I repeated. On whose property? Ethan's voice broke. On my mother? Cassandra didn't respond. I walked to the window then, looking out at the morning light over the water. The house felt different now, no longer under threat, but under truth. I didn't raise you to take shortcuts, I said quietly, and I didn't build this life so someone else could claim it through pressure. Ethan whispered, I didn't know how to stop it. That, I said, turning back, is something you'll have to sit with. Miguel stepped forward. Mrs. Marrow, would you like me to contact your attorney? Yes, I said, please. Cassandra's breath hitched. You don't have to do this. I already have, I replied. The sound of Miguel dialing was steady. Ruth moved closer to me, her shoulder brushing mine. You're doing the right thing, she murmured. I nodded. Because sometimes the strongest move isn't raising your voice. It's letting everyone hear exactly what's been said when they thought you weren't listening. And as the phone rang and Cassandra realized the ground beneath her was no longer solid, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't the moment she took my house. This was the moment she exposed herself. And what comes next would be impossible to undo. The house didn't feel loud after Cassandra stopped speaking. It felt exposed, like a room where the lights have just been turned on and everyone suddenly realizes they're standing too close to the truth. Miguel stepped aside after ending the call with Jonah Pierce. He'll be here within the hour, he said. Until then, nothing moves. Cassandra folded her arms tightly as if holding herself together required physical effort. You're overreacting, she said. All of this could have been handled privately. Privacy is what allowed this, I replied. Clarity requires witnesses. Ruth nodded. That's right. Ethan was still on the line. I could hear his breathing, quick, shallow, uncertain. Mom, can we talk, just us? We are talking, I said. You just don't like the audience. That's not fair. No, I corrected gently. It's accurate. Cassandra spun toward the phone. Ethan, tell her this isn't how families solve things. Ethan hesitated, and in that hesitation something fragile broke. You shouldn't have brought movers, he said quietly. Cassandra's eyes snapped to him. Excuse me, you shouldn't have done it without her consent, he continued, voice shaking. I didn't say yes to this. You didn't say no either, she shot back. The silence that followed was sharp. Ruth cleared her throat. Silence isn't neutral, she said. It just chooses the stronger side. Cassandra laughed once bitterly. Of course you'd say that. Miguel shifted his weight, steady as stone. Ma'am, please lower your voice. She turned on him. Don't tell me what to do in my own, she stopped. In her own what? The word never came. I watched her realize it, watched the sentence collapse before it could be finished. Ownership isn't something you can claim mid-argument. It has to already be true. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. That surprised me, not because I expected fear, but because I expected grief. Instead, there was something cleaner inside me. Resolve, perhaps. When I returned, Cassandra was pacing. You think this makes you powerful, she said to me, but all it does is push Ethan away. I looked at my son's name on the phone screen. He's still here. For now, she said. That's not a threat, Ruth said sharply. That's manipulation. Cassandra rounded on her. You don't know anything about my marriage. I know pressure when I see it, Ruth replied. And I know what it looks like when someone mistakes access for entitlement. Ethan spoke again, quieter now. Cass, did you really believe Mom wouldn't notice? She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the charm was gone. I believed, she said slowly, that she would eventually give in. There it was, not confusion, not misunderstanding, expectation. And when I didn't, I asked. Her gaze met mine. Then we'd force the issue. Jonah Pierce arrived without ceremony, which somehow made his presence heavier. He didn't rush, didn't look around in curiosity, didn't ask unnecessary questions. He simply stepped inside, nodded once at Miguel, once at Ruth, and then looked directly at me as if we had been in the middle of a conversation for years and were finally continuing it. He set his leather briefcase on the dining table, opened it with deliberate calm, and said, Mrs. Marrow, I've reviewed the preliminary notes you sent. Before we proceed, I want everything stated clearly, out loud, and in front of witnesses. Cassandra scoffed. You're acting like she's been robbed. Jonah didn't look at her. I'm acting like intent matters. Ethan's voice came through the phone again, strained now. Mom, I'm coming there. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Cassandra turned away, pacing again, heels tapping too sharply against the floor. This is getting out of control, she muttered. It's only out of control when you can't steer it anymore, Ruth said quietly. Jonah finally looked at Cassandra then, his expression neutral but cutting. Mrs. Marrow, did you instruct movers to access this property this morning? Cassandra lifted her chin. Yes. Did you possess a deed, power of attorney, or written authorization from the legal owner? Cassandra hesitated for half a second too long. Not finalized, she said. Jonah nodded once and wrote something down. Did you represent yourself to the movers as the owner? I said the house was being transferred. Jonah's pen paused. That is not an answer to my question. Cassandra's jaw tightened. Yes. The word landed heavily in the room. Miguel shifted his stance, hands clasped behind his back. Ruth inhaled slowly as if steadying herself. I remained still. Jonah closed his notebook and looked at me. Mrs. Marrow, for the record, do you confirm that no transfer of ownership has occurred and that you did not authorize access, removal, or entry for relocation purposes? I confirm that, I said. Jonah nodded. Thank you. He turned to Cassandra again. What you attempted this morning constitutes attempted misrepresentation of ownership. Depending on further evidence, it may escalate to attempted theft, coercion, or elder financial exploitation. Cassandra laughed, but there was panic under it. That's dramatic. No, Jonah replied calmly. That's procedural. Ethan's car pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later. I didn't look out the window, but I felt the shift in the house when he walked in. He looked older than he had a few hours earlier, as if something heavy had settled on his shoulders during the drive. His eyes went first to Cassandra, then to Jonah, then finally to me. "Mom," he said softly. "Sit down," Jonah said, not unkindly. Ethan obeyed without argument, which told me more than words could. Cassandra stepped toward him immediately. "Ethan, tell them this is being blown out of proportion." He looked up at her, really looked, and something in his expression changed. "Why didn't you tell me you called movers?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I didn't think you'd object." "You didn't think," he said, voice tight. Jonah interjected smoothly. "Mr. Marrow, your wife represented herself as owner of this property. Were you aware of or did you consent to that claim?" Ethan shook his head. "No," Cassandra turned sharply. "Ethan, no," he repeated louder now. "I didn't know. I didn't agree, and I wouldn't have." Silence followed, thick and unmistakable. Jonah closed his briefcase halfway, a gesture that felt like punctuation. "Then we proceed with clarity." He looked at Cassandra. "Effective immediately, you are not to act on behalf of Mrs. Marrow's assets, property, or interests. Any further attempt will be documented." Cassandra's composure cracked. "You're choosing her over me," she demanded of Ethan. He stood slowly. "I'm choosing reality." Her eyes flicked to me, sharp with resentment. "This isn't over." I met her gaze evenly. "It is," I said. "You just don't know it yet." Cassandra grabbed her bag and left without another word, the door closing behind her with a force that echoed through the house. Ethan stayed standing, hands shaking slightly. "I didn't think she'd go this far," he said. "That's the danger of comfort," I replied. "It makes you stop asking questions." Jonah slid a single document across the table toward me. "I recommend immediate protective measures," he said. "Reaffirmed ownership filings, restricted access orders, and a recorded affidavit regarding today's events." I nodded. "Do it." Ethan looked at me, eyes wet. "Mom, am I losing you?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "No," I said, "but you're about to find out what it costs to keep me." The house didn't feel louder after Cassandra left. It felt sharper. As if the walls themselves had straightened, waiting to see what would happen next. Ethan sat down heavily on the sofa, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it might offer instructions. Miguel remained near the doorway, professional and silent, but I noticed how his posture stayed alert, protective. Ruth moved closer to me, her presence steady, grounding, the way it had been for decades. Jonah Pierce was already opening his briefcase again, methodical, unhurried, as if time itself bent around his work. "Mrs. Marrow," Jonah said, "the next steps matter. What happens in the next 48 hours will determine whether this ends cleanly or festers." I nodded. "Then we don't hesitate." Ethan looked up sharply. "Mom, what does that mean?" I turned to him. "It means I stop protecting everyone else from consequences." His face tightened, but he didn't argue. That, at least, was new. Jonah laid out documents across the table, each one labeled, each one precise. "First, we file an affidavit documenting today's attempted misrepresentation. Miguel's security logs, the mover call records, and Ruth's witness statement will be attached. Second, we register a restriction notice on all properties under your name. No access, no transfers, no management authority without your direct consent." He glanced at Ethan. "Including family?" Ethan swallowed. "I understand." Ruth placed a hand over mine. "Helen, you don't owe anyone silence anymore." Her voice was soft but unwavering. That sentence settled something deep in my chest. I had spent years believing calm meant endurance. I was learning it also meant action. Ethan finally spoke again. "She said you were confused," he admitted quietly. "That you were tired, that you didn't want to deal with things anymore." I looked at him, not with anger, but with clarity. "And you didn't ask me if that was true?" He flinched. I thought she was helping." "Help doesn't erase the person it claims to protect," I said. Jonah's pen paused just for a second before continuing. Miguel cleared his throat. "Mrs. Marrow, for your safety, I recommend temporary access monitoring, not surveillance, just verification. Anyone entering or requesting entry is logged, identity confirmed." I nodded. "Approved." Ethan's head snapped up. "Security on your own house?" I met his gaze evenly. "This is my house." He nodded slowly, as if hearing that sentence for the first time. The afternoon passed in a blur of signatures and confirmations. Jonah explained each document before I signed, not because I didn't understand, but because he respected the process. That respect mattered. When he finally closed his briefcase, he said, "There's one more thing." Ethan tensed. "What?" Jonah looked at me. "You need to decide how much access your son has going forward." Silence settled between us. Ethan stood abruptly. "Mom, if this is about cutting me out, sit down," I said, not raising my voice. He obeyed. I took a breath. "This isn't punishment, it's boundaries." Jonah nodded slightly. "We can structure limited access, financial transparency without authority, information without control." Ethan's shoulders sagged. "I don't want to lose you." I softened just a fraction. "Then stop trying to stand between me and my own life." That evening, after Jonah left and Miguel completed his rounds, the house grew quiet in a different way. Not tense, intentional. Ruth stayed for dinner. We didn't talk about Cassandra. We talked about ordinary things: her garden, my reading, the weather turning cooler sooner than expected. Ethan hovered at the edges, uncertain, like a guest in a place he used to belong. Later, he knocked on my study door. "Can I come in?" "Yes." He sat across from me, hands folded. "I didn't realize how much I let her speak for me," he said. "I thought avoiding conflict was kindness." I looked at him steadily. "Avoidance isn't kindness, it's abdication." He nodded, eyes wet. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't fix it," I replied. "You learn from it." The next morning, Cassandra called. I didn't answer. Jonah did on my behalf. He was polite, firm, final. When he hung up, he sent a single text to me. "She understands the boundaries now." I stared at the message for a long moment before setting my phone down. By afternoon, the legal filings were complete. The house was secure. My name stood unchallenged where it always had, but something else had shifted too inside me. The calm I felt wasn't relief, it was readiness. Ethan stood by the window, watching the driveway. "She won't stop," he said quietly. I joined him. "Neither will I." He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time in years, I saw respect instead of expectation in his eyes. Ruth squeezed my arm as she prepared to leave. "You did the right thing," I smiled faintly. "I did the necessary thing." After the door closed, I stood alone in the living room, listening to the quiet I had chosen, not endured. And for the first time since Dawn had shattered my morning, I knew this wasn't the end of the conflict. It was the moment the balance shifted. The next test didn't come from Cassandra, it came from Ethan. I noticed it in the way he lingered that morning, hovering near the kitchen doorway while I poured my coffee. He watched me the way someone watches a shoreline before deciding whether to step into the water. Careful, hesitant, afraid of misjudging the depth. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. "Mom, I got a call from her sister." That was enough to tighten the air. I didn't turn around. "And?" I asked. "She said Cassandra's telling people you're being manipulated, that Jonah is controlling you. That Miguel scared her on purpose." I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Of course she is." Ethan rubbed his hands together. "Some of the family is asking questions." I turned to face him then, steady and composed. "Are you asking them with her?" He flinched. "No, I don't want this to spiral." I set my mug down. "Ethan, it already did, you just didn't see it because it wasn't touching you yet." The words landed heavily between us. By noon, Ruth knocked on the door, her expression sharper than usual. "You're not imagining things," she said before I could even invite her in. "Cassandra was at the cafe this morning. Telling anyone who would listen that you're losing your grip, that you're being taken advantage of." I nodded. "She's building a narrative." Ruth folded her arms. "Then it's time to break it." Jonah arrived shortly after, summoned not by panic but by timing. He listened without interrupting as Ruth recounted what she'd heard, as Ethan admitted what had been said to him. When they finished, Jonah adjusted his glasses. "This is predictable," he said calmly. "When access is denied, reputation is attacked." Ethan frowned. "So what do we do?" Jonah looked at me. "We document, and then we clarify publicly but cleanly." That word publicly made Ethan stiffen. "You mean tell people?" Jonah nodded. "Selective disclosure, not defense, transparency." I felt the weight of the moment settle in my chest. For years, I had handled things quietly, privately, believing discretion was strength. Now I understood something else. Silence, when weaponized by others, becomes surrender. We started with facts. Jonah drafted a concise statement, no emotion, no accusation, just truth, my ownership, my capacity, my decisions. Ruth offered to circulate it among neighbors and family friends who mattered, not the ones hungry for gossip. Miguel provided security logs not to intimidate but to verify procedure. Everything aligned, deliberate, and restrained. Ethan watched the process unfold with a mix of relief and discomfort. I didn't realize how easy it is for someone to rewrite a story, he said quietly. I looked at him. That's why preparation matters more than confrontation. He nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson too late but not uselessly. That evening, Cassandra tried again, this time through Ethan. Her voice came through the speaker thin and urgent. You're letting her destroy me, she said. She's turning everyone against me. Ethan's jaw tightened. No, he replied, surprising both of us. You did that. There was a pause, sharp and electric, then the line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone as if it had burned him. I should have said that a long time ago. I placed a hand on his arm. You said it now. The fallout came faster than I expected. By the next morning, the whispers shifted. Not gone, but quieter, more cautious. Cassandra's certainty cracked when facts replaced insinuation. Jonah called to confirm filings were complete. She has no leverage left, he said. Only noise, I smiled faintly. Noise fades. But the real reckoning came later that day when Ethan asked, what happens between us now? The question carried more weight than any legal document. I studied him carefully. That depends on what you're willing to unlearn, he swallowed. I don't want to be passive anymore. I held his gaze. Then stop waiting for someone else to tell you who you are. That night, after everyone left, I walked through the house alone. The rooms felt different, not because anything had changed physically, but because nothing felt borrowed anymore. My decisions, my boundaries, my voice. I stood by the window, watching the last light fade, and felt a calm deeper than relief settle into my bones. Cassandra wasn't finished. I knew that. People who confuse control with love rarely let go quietly, but I was no longer bracing for impact. I was ready for it. And somewhere in that readiness, I understood the truth I had been circling for days. The danger was never the dawn alarm or the movers or the lies. The real danger had been hesitation. I wasn't hesitating anymore. The silence after everything settled was different from the silence before. Before, it had been heavy, crowded with unspoken fears and careful omissions. Now it was clean, intentional. I woke the morning after Cassandra's last attempt feeling something unfamiliar, certainty. Not the fragile kind that depends on other people behaving well, but the kind built on preparation, documentation, and finally telling the truth out loud. Miguel walked the perimeter as usual, clipboard in hand, nodding to me through the window. The house felt secure again, not because of locks or alarms, but because the rules were finally clear. Jonah stopped by late morning with a thin folder. Final confirmation, he said. She withdrew her claim entirely, no appeal. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Good, I said. Then it's done? Jonah met my eyes. Legally, yes. Emotionally, that part is yours. Ethan arrived that afternoon alone, no tense preamble, no excuses. He sat at the table where so many conversations had gone wrong and folded his hands. I'm staying at a short-term rental, he said. I need space to think without someone else steering me. I nodded. That's a start. He looked up. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm choosing differently now. His voice didn't shake. For the first time in years, it didn't drift either. Ruth brought over soup just before sunset like she always did when she sensed a chapter closing. She tasted it, nodded approvingly, then smiled at me. You know, she said, people are talking, but not the way Cassandra wanted. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, they're saying you're sharper than anyone gave you credit for. I smiled back. I'll take that. That night I walked through the house slowly, touching the door frames, the windows, the places where doubt had once lived. Nothing felt contested anymore, not the walls, not my choices, not my future. I had learned something I wished I'd understood sooner. Love doesn't require surrender, and family doesn't get to rewrite your worth. I sat by the window as the lights dimmed outside and allowed myself a moment of pride, not loud, not performative. Quiet, earned. I hadn't raised my voice, I hadn't panicked, I had prepared, and that had made all the difference. If this story resonated with you, if you believe calm can be powerful and preparation can change everything, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more stories like it. Sometimes the strongest move is simply being ready.